Okay, thanks, Paul. And Eric, it's great to see you again for the next
Likewise.
installment of our series. We don't have JGP here with us. I haven't seen him around the room, so it'll be just us this time. And what I've found about these sessions, and let me just introduce myself, and then I'll introduce our session here. My name's John Miller. I'm a reformed consultant. Who's been doing data architecture and data engineering for 20 plus years. And I've known and collaborated with Eric for at least the last 15 or so. And it's a pleasure to be able to moderate this discussion and get involved with the discussion around data mesh because a lot of the principles are an extension or an evolution of what we've been talking about for 30 years in data. And it's really great to see all of that crystallized in a book that Eric and JGP have written about implementing data mesh. And hopefully, folks that listen to us get to enjoy some of the discussion and ask questions. The most valuable thing I find on meetups like this is that when you come with questions that you have specifically about your organization and um, if we can help, we'd love to. So anyway, that's me. That's a little bit of overview of this, and over to you, Eric, to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, John. As John mentioned, we've been working together for it has to be over 15 years, and we've done everything from AI, machine learning, the old stuff, AI model ops, etc. And recently, John was also a tech reviewer for our book, so always glad to interact with John. In terms of background for myself, I've been around for a long time, 35, probably 40 plus years in the industry, give or take. I was an executive at big banks and insurance companies, consulting companies, et cetera. The last 7 years, though, I've run my own boutique consulting company. And what we do is we implement data mesh. Obviously, that it includes related technologies and platforms, API platforms, event streaming platforms, etc. Gen AI capability. We also take care of not just the technology, we do the strategy work as necessary. We actually do the implementation of op models and teams, which is what we're going to talk about today. Last but not least, obviously, I'm the author with JGP of the book Implementing Data Mesh, available on AWS and anywhere you can get good books, I suppose, including the O'Reilly portal. So, John, back to you.
Okay, now I'm just thinking, Eric. Oh, there it is. Do you have your implementing data mesh book?
I do, but I'm gonna have to back up a little bit here and get it.
Yeah, me too. So here's the
There we
book,
go. There we go.
just so folks can see it. And um, I enjoy the data topics, as many of you do out there that might be listening in. And what I like about the book and what I've heard some feedback that agrees with me is that it's organized into three parts. The part one is really revisiting the basics and what was in the original data mesh book from Zamak, and then part two gets you into actually designing and building and deploying a data mesh. And what I like about this section is that, and we've talked about it before, is it covers data products, data contracts. You talked about data mesh architecture, building your first product, and then build meshing together data products. But the third section is really for us that are focused on the social part of the socio-technical phenomenon that is data mesh. And this is where we're going to be talking today. It's really about designing the team, designing the organization, the processes, and this is really where we talk about data governance, data mesh teams, and the operating model. And then if you're a consultant, you've ever done any road mapping, you'll find chapter 16 brilliant because it gives you everything you need to think holistically about a roadmap if you're trying to help an organization get from here to there. So great book. This is all about teams and organizational design. But let's back up a second. Why, Eric? What compelled you to go through the journey of writing a book? And just tell us a little about how you were inspired, you and JGP got together on this.
Yeah, sure. Probably this all started with, to be honest with you, JGP. And he and I had collaborated on a whole bunch of things. We were on the data mesh learning Slack channel, et cetera, exchanged a whole bunch of ideas. And then we had the opportunity, he had the opportunity actually to pitch to O'Reilly this book, Implementing Data Mesh. And he asked me if I wanted to be a joint author. And the obvious answer was yes. Now, he warned me, make sure you know what you're getting into. There's a lot of work to this. It was a ton of work, but we ended up still staying friends afterwards. And hopefully the result of that collaboration, the book, demonstrates some of the excitement we have in this field. In terms of why we wrote this, the real practical thing that we've heard time and time again is Zamac's book is outstanding. It is relatively theoretical, although I would disagree with a little bit of that, but that's some of the feedback. But the real thing that people were saying is there a way to actually put that theory into practice? So that's what we tried to do with this book. Hence, it's obviously called Implementing Data Mesh. But it's really aimed towards a wide variety of people. Obviously, there's the practitioner, the folks that actually want to implement data mesh. So we've, as John mentioned, there's chapters on architecture. There's chapters on building your first data contract, your first data product, et cetera. So the core audience is definitely inclusive of the practitioner. But what we've also found, and Zamac made this very clear, as John highlighted, this is a socio-technical capability. What that means is the technology piece is important. That's the second half of the word. And that's probably where we all tend to start, but you shouldn't really forget the socio part, the organizational aspect. What I've heard with my experience and others is the socio part, the organizational aspect, is probably the hardest part of any implementation, winning the hearts and minds, if you will, of people and having them change direction, going from centralized to federated, both from an organizational perspective and architecture perspective, is not a simple thing. Changing people's perspective is a difficult thing to do, which is why the second piece of the audience is really around the executive who wants to actually go about implementing data mesh, recognizing that they may not be hands on keyboard, although there are some executives that definitely are, but they're probably not generally hands on keyboard, but rather guiding a group of people to actually implement this capability and change course, if you will. And they need to actually understand, how do I actually, or what does the team structure look like? What are the interactions between those teams? And how do I design the operating model, the incentive structure, to actually encourage the behavior that we want? So the executive is a clear audience also. What we found, though, is the other piece, that the puzzle that was missing, is how do I actually manage the implementation? So we have a section on the roadmap, and obviously the team structure and the various roles highlight those capabilities and interests required if you're a project manager. And last but not least, it's the governance professional. Uh, my philosophy on data mesh anyway is a little bit leaning towards the, let a thousand flowers bloom and we'll see which ones live to the next season. And that's I say that with tongue in cheek, that a little bit more laissez-faire, but the truth of the matter is you cannot grow and expand your data mesh, your ecosystem of data products, unless you actually know how to govern them. What is a good data product, and how do I actually determine if it's good, and how do I certify it so other people can actually believe it's good? So the governance professional is the last but not least audience for the book, John.
Yeah. Okay, that was a lot. And I know sorry, I speak. You
I said it all in one breath too, believe it or not.
let's not forget to breathe. So, and we had somebody on the line. David was saying, was giving us a better way to think about the difference between the books. He was saying that it's more like how to put the principles rather than the theory into practice and implementation. I think, David, you're spot on. And what I've heard some people say about the book is what they really liked the climate quantum ink example. And just so people know what that means and how that whole thing got started, can you just give us a little context around that, Eric? Because I think that's really brilliant application of mesh, and it's where a lot of your implementation, or it's one of the threads of your experience that it sort of informs the book. So can you talk a little bit about climate quantum?
Yeah, sure. Definitely do that. Just to echo what John mentioned regarding David, you are spot on. I think I didn't say it quite properly, theory in quotes, but it is turning principles into practice. Um, Now, coming back to your question, John, Climate Quantum Inc. is the case study that we use within the book. And it's a particularly, I think, particularly useful because it highlights all the concepts, but I think it's also particularly timely, recognizing some of the climate challenges that we're experiencing, some of us experiencing quite directly on a day-to-day basis. So what we wanted to do was provide a meaningful case study that allowed us to actually apply the various different concepts and use that case study to demonstrate the different facets, whether it's the architecture, the operating model, the teams, and how we would actually apply those put into practice all of those things that we have in the book in a real case study. This actually is a real case study. We changed the name for obvious reasons, but it is an open source project that myself, my team, as well as a variety of others, including some big European banks and insurance companies, are actually participating in. We're building, euphemistically, we like to call it the world's biggest data mesh. But what we're trying to do is make climate data easy to find, consume, share, and trust. It's really that simple. And if you have the climate data, then you can do all sorts of things with it. Obviously, you can anticipate risk, you can determine risk, you can cost risk, et cetera. And maybe even have an opportunity to be a little bit more proactive with some of the climate disasters that we're seeing. So we thought it was quite appropriate. But here's the challenge and why climate quantum was so important. Um, Climate data is a supremely complicated ecosystem. If you think about any given enterprise, think about probably hundreds to thousands times the data quantity, the data files, the formats, the structures, everything from video to satellite images. Single satellite image could be like 28 gigabytes. And it has to be parsed and all sorts of stuff. But what you have is tremendous variety in terms of format, volume, and owners. Climate data is owned by literally tens of thousands of entities, some big, some small, big ones like NASA, small ones that actually have a particular data source and they're experts in flood data or whatever, and they actually advertise that. Now, why am I saying this? It pertains directly to the operating model discussion that we're having, the teams that we have. But what ends up happening is if you have hundreds, if not thousands, of discrete data sources owned by individual organizations that have their own incentives, their own direction, their own pace of change, their own mission and purpose, how do you actually get those folks together? How do you manage a federated environment? Well, data mesh is all about federation. And
Yes.
the unit of federation is data products. So Climate Quantum illustrates how we implement data products at scale in a completely federated environment. And what are the implications of that? How do you do that? What's the technology behind it? Now, not every enterprise is completely federated, but we thought this was one of those extreme examples that allowed us to apply every one of the concepts, every one of the practices in a meaningful way that clearly demonstrated the concept. So again, not every organization is going to be this complicated, but it allows us to illustrate the principles across the continuum end to end.
Yeah, and what I particularly liked is that it is clearly federated governance, right? You're not going to tell NASA or the National Oceanic Administration how to manage their data, but you need it. And so, how do you, in a federated world, which is what we all live in, inside your organization or inside an external to your organization, how do you think about solving those problems? Okay, so folks, please ask questions, but let me start with the first one. So today is about organizational or operating models and teams. Let's start at the beginning. What is your definition of an operating model and what's a team? Give us some basic understanding of uh, how to think about teams and an operating model. Just
Sure. Yeah. The teams I think are pretty obvious, but we'll go into that in a lot more detail. But let me talk about operating model first. An operating model is really the blueprint for how an organization functions, its interactions, its processes, and how it actually makes decisions to achieve its goals. It's really that simple. Now, mind you, the definition is quite simple, but there's clearly a lot of nuances. You have to think about, how federated or how centralized will I be or can I actually be? Um, Depending on how centralized or federated you are, how do those interactions actually work? And there's a ton of different nuances around that, but the operating model binds together the organization, the processes, and to a certain degree the technology and the governance that enables an organization to do what it needs to do to fulfill its purpose. It's that actually that simple. In the work that we've done in the book, we actually go through that in depth and we talk a little bit about some of the different operating models that you do. So your organizational models, probably more. So there's examples you can deploy data mesh in a highly centralized environment. You can do it in a matrixed organization, and you can do it in a federated organization. Probably the ideal one, I suppose. And you can also do it in a distributed type of fully distributed environment, like the climate example, or like there's other distributed organizations like Apache that illustrate the distributed nature. They may not be doing necessarily data mesh as a solution, but you can kind of get the idea. So we walk through a little bit about what does it mean to actually recognize what type of operating model and organizational model you have. And then we try and structure a little bit of some of the feedback and opportunities that data mesh provides to actually deploy data products at scale in those various different organizational structures. Now, there's a few nuances that I'm sure we'll get to a little bit later in the discussion.
yeah, yeah, no, that's great, Eric. I think we just sort of framing the conversation around how the organization makes decisions and how they're organized. There's a great diagram on page 204 that sort of talks about the continuum. And I think that's helpful. But tell me, so it's one thing to say that there's a continuum, but it's another thing where you've actually helped customers implement data mesh in different organizations. I'm thinking of big insurance, big bank, big tech company, right? All three of those are different places that you might draw from. Um, you know, how how do you get started with thinking about your like thinking about the operating model? Like, how do I sort of wrap this around my head?
Yeah, sure. The we'll start. This will be probably a discussion starting with teams, which then expands into an operating model. So I'll give you a few examples, and almost every one of my client engagements kind of work the same way. And I think this is just the natural way that folks think. But almost everybody, when they talk about data mesh and realizing some of the business opportunities they have, as technology experts in many respects, what most of us try and do is we try and deal with the things that we're most comfortable with. And what that usually means, if I have a technology hammer, everything tends to look like a technology nail. Um, so what we found is almost all the organizations tend to start with a technology frame of reference. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we found is very quickly, if you don't expand into the organizational side, you very quickly run into roadblocks, and things tend to gum up the works. The very first thing that we found is when this I will admit, the first few times we did this, it was a lesson learned that educated me a little bit. But the education and lesson learned is this: is when you're thinking about the technology, you have to think about the team's structure and long term the operating model that will actually implement that. So as a concrete example, one of my clients had a particular business opportunity to bring a product to market, and the traditional ways of doing things, for one reason or another, were not acceptable. Too costly, took too long. And we had an opportunity to change the discussion a little bit, and we did this a little bit right around the time, just shortly before the book, Zemak's original book was published. So the notion around data products and stuff wasn't necessarily as crystallized as it was. But what we ended up doing is we ended up building some basic technology capability. So an API backbone, a cloud-based data backbone. And we found that we had enough to experiment with and to do some proof of concepts. What we found, though, very quickly is that if we wanted to actually deliver on the promise of what the executive wanted and to deliver it quickly, as we had thought we could, we actually had to change the organization. So what we ended up doing is we created platform teams that would enable our core team, which ended up being a data product team, enabled the core team to actually take advantage of some of the common platforms that were actually out there. So we did not have to build an API platform because it was built. We didn't have to build a core data management platform on the cloud because somebody had actually built that. We established platform teams. What that really meant, though, is we carved up organizationally from a central group. We actually did some small reorganizations to the point where we had they were small but independent platform teams to support effectively our data product team. We found that was one of the keys to success. The second key to success was to bring on some enabling teams, is what we call. And by the way, I'm going to use the terminology from team topologies. It's a book by Matthew Skelton and Matthew Pace. Fantastic book, strongly recommend it. But they go through this all in detail, and I just happen to be fortunate enough to use their terminology. So kudos to the folks that actually originated this. But so we built the platform teams, which is one of the teams in the team topologies. But the other one that we found critical was the enabling teams. The enabling teams can be a bunch of different things, but the very first one, and probably the single most important one, was our stakeholder group. We don't normally look at the stakeholder group, which is the executive steering group and people directly under that, as an enabling team. But if you actually look at their role, their explicit role was to further the progress, remove the obstacles that we may incur as we tried to develop our first data product. And we found that to be immensely useful. So that was the second one. There's a few other capabilities that complicated systems teams is what the team topology folks call it. We're mainframe experts and such. But what we ended up doing is we actually had to structure a team to deliver the core data product. We were using Agile, so it wasn't necessarily anything new, but we carved out explicit responsibilities for a platform team, for a enabling team, specifically stakeholder team, a governance team that allowed us to change the way that we looked at governance. I'm sure we'll be talking about that later. But the key to success there was not only did we found a sponsor who had a very particular specific business problem that if we solved would deliver immense value, but we structured the teams to actually allow us to take advantage of some of the technology that already existed. We had the accountability in our own data product team to actually create the stuff that we needed to create. But we had a set of collaborating teams that actually allowed us to deliver. Now is the core to the operating model. What we found, just to extend now into the operating model, as we actually found success and delivered on the promise of this particular first data product, what we found, this organization now has about 50 or 60 data products out there now. That first set of first success that we had was the role model for how this organization started to evolve their actual platform teams, enabling teams, et cetera. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that it completely changed the way the organization worked, but they implemented data products, data mesh at scale, using the end-to-end socio-technical capability, and implemented the operating model things that we've talked about that quite frankly I think were the key to our success.
Okay, that was a lot. I know a lot about the experience you had. So I think one of the things I often hear is how much of this organizational change, like, do you have to obviously it's very difficult to change how an organization is organized into teams. So in your experience in that one example, um, how much of the IT organization, because I'm assuming it was in the technology organization that had to reorganize their teams, like how much of that was done temporarily as part of a program of implementation, and how much of that sort of changed the way the organization sort of ran in general going forward? And because I think your experience there is helpful.
Yeah. So this is the organizations. I've done this at major technology provider. I've done it at insurance company. I've done it at banks, and obviously this climate nonprofit. Um, the you have to start small. Is probably maybe that's an obvious statement, but everything starts with a long journey starts with your first step, as they say. So your first data product is absolutely crucial. And whatever recommendations you make for that first data product are inherently temporary. What that means, though, is if you are successful, deliver on the promise, you get perhaps a sponsor that helps you build some momentum. Those transient or temporary changes become more permanent. Now, they're not going to become permanent until you've actually had a really strong track record of success, 5, 7, 10 data products across maybe one or two important parts of the organization. Um, change starts with the very first step, and I think that's actually the key. Now, in the organizations that I'm working with, they're very, very large. So I'm not naive enough to think that what we did in this small particular area, even if we have 50 of these data products running around now, that it's going to change this international organization. It's not, at least not immediately. But what I think happened is we now have a new tool in our tool belt that we can apply to data management challenges. And how do we actually make one of the things we try and do is we try and make data agile to allow a business to get faster time to market, faster time to revenue, et cetera. So by applying these things and demonstrating that data can be more agile, the hope is that the principles that we've now implemented can be applied broadly. That's a long, long journey, and I'm hoping that at some point I'll be able to check in with some of my clients, 5, 10 years from now and see where that went. But it's a long journey, and we're at the early stages.
Yeah, well, and I think this is important because it's come up every time we've had one of these webinars. Somebody will ask, well, how do I get started? And it almost always has been the answer that you have to have success, even if it's a transient change or a program, you have to have success. And that first success of whether you start with a data product or a data contract, I mean, that was a debate in our last session, but I think it always starts with that first step. And it's important to have the vision of where you're going. And that's what I like about the roadmap that you have in the back of the book. So you can create a vision of where we're going to get to, but you start small and you have to prove it in the organization before you can affect change. Um, we've got a couple of questions that have popped in, and I wanted to thank folks for asking questions. I'm going to take a couple now just and throw them in there. Um, the first one, I think it's Andre. I might be mispronouncing the Russian name, But apologies if I've bastardized it too much. But it's a question about technology and platforms. And you've used the term platform a lot, Eric, to represent technology platforms and other things. But the question from the audience was, you know, we've made a platform to enable teams to formalize their expectations in the form of data contracts. And there's a lot of us out here trying to implement data contracts as part of our data products and data mesh strategy. And so he's uh, part of a company or a team that's built something. Um, what are your thoughts about that? Can you suggest any solutions from the market that can help offer scalable and his first question is around data contract observability and enforcement. So just take that as a broad question around tooling around products and contracts, because I think it's a very good question, Andre.
Yeah, sure. No, Andre, that's and again, hopefully we got the name right. I think it's an excellent question. We do cover it at length in the book, but let me kind of bring it to life. First off, data contracts and observability, a close cousin, fundamental to success in data mesh, fundamental to success in delivering data products at scale. Um, in terms of specific vendor products, these things, first off, let me give you my general philosophy. I try to be vendor neutral. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but related to that is the vendor landscape, especially at this early stage, is changing quite rapidly. So here's what I would say, though. I do refer back to standards that I think have some long-term viability. So the one that we're very familiar with, in fact, JGP, my co-author, who's not here today, he's at a Linux Foundation conference for BITOL, BITOL, which is a Linux Foundation project for data contracts. And I think it just graduated from incubation phase to, I can't remember the second stage, but that's a huge big deal. That means there's, broadly speaking, some industry confidence in that as a standard. So from that area, I would actually, from that perspective, I would suggest that's where I would start with. There's a bunch of others. Just do a quick Google. You'll find other competing standards or prospective standards, I should probably say. Observability, perhaps less mature at this point in time. So I don't have a perspective yet, but let me kind of bring these things a little bit together. The foundation, the foundation of data mesh is in the ecosystem of data products being the foundation of data mesh. Every data product has a boundary, but within that boundary, this is one of the concepts we elaborate a lot in the book. Every data product has a boundary, and what do you do at that boundary? You have interfaces. I'll just use RESTful interfaces as an example. You have RESTful interfaces that allow folks to, other data products, other applications, consumers, to actually interact with the data product. One level under that, inside the data product, is a data contract. And that data contract says, among other things, what is the policy that I actually want to have my data adhere to, both the data coming in, the requests coming in, the data that's ingested, et cetera, but also the data that I store, the metadata, the quality of service and expectations around that, the quality, not just the quality of service. All those things are covered in the data product. And what I would say, the BITOL project endeavors to capture that. But what we find is it's largely hidden inside the data product, which to be honest with, gives you a lot of flexibility. And the way we actually highlight these is when we have a few very simple RESTful interfaces for all data products. And if you have this standardized, then you can build them at scale. But there's a /discovery, and I know the endpoints in a real production environment would be very much more complex and such. But for trivial purposes, /discover gives you, for example, information about the data product, i.e., the data product contract. And we have a /observe interface, which allows us to hide the implementation of observability, but allows you to communicate observability, whether it's usage statistics, whether it's lineage, performance metrics, all those things. So the key for me, and this is why is there a vendor that I'd recommend? Is there a standard? I've given you the answer on those, but they're hidden inside the data product, exposed through simple interfaces that make them accessible, normalized across your entire data mesh. So that's the architecture, architect in me speaking, and it gives you a little bit of thoughts around where you may want to go for some practical implementation.
Yeah, and we're not trying to say this is the market assessment of products for observability or mesh or contracts. We're just saying what you've experienced, and you're pointing to that open source project as a one way to get started. And there's a lot of competing ways. And myself, I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing with my current customer, but it's going to be one of these techniques, and we'll see. So I don't think we'll be able to completely answer your question, Andre, but enterprise software is a very complicated game, and open source is one place to start, and there's a lot of places to get more information. Now, so I've talked about Andre's thing, but then David came back with a good question specifically about that insurance company we were talking about, and he was, and I should have probably thrown this question to you before, so we're switching context. So, tell us, he says, rather than build a self-service data platform, you reorged an existing cloud platform, compute, network data team. Is that basically right? Like, so you didn't materialize people from outside the organization. There were pre-existing teams that you were able to reorg. Is that basically right? Can you say a
Yeah,
little about that?
yeah. I'll give this. This occurred at each of my clients, so I don't
Okay.
want to single any specific one out. And each of them were a little bit different. Um, the organization that we created for the first set of data products, uh, for all intents and purposes, just carved out existing people from an existing organization.
Right.
And we actually, they ended up being part-time. Some of them were part-time, one or two were full-time. Um, but ultimately, what we ended up having was people that were dedicated, and it was a priority to help our data, our small data product team actually be successful. Over time, those, as you have more and more data products, what you end up having is not just part-time people, but you have more full-time people. Now, what is the best way to structure that? First off, typically what I found with these platform teams, is first off, they're filled with people with scarce talents, which generally means unless you have a significant volume of work, you're not going to get full-time dedicated people, and you're not going to separate them from the mothership, if you will. So I don't think that's necessarily the right answer. The right answer, though, is ensuring that you know who the person is in these platform teams, who you can go to, and that your requests are prioritized. In other words, they may not be dedicated, and they may be working on a bunch of different projects, but there's a very clear priority on what work they're actually going to do and where you fit in that priority scheme. Once you've done that, you can actually share scarce resources. Now, are all these resources, scarce today? Will they be scarce tomorrow? Maybe, maybe not. What we found is as the scope of the data products grow, some of the things that may be part-time, some of those responsibilities may actually move into the data product team. So as an example, cloud database resources may be quite scarce to find. I know, John, you're a practicing Snowflake wizard, and you are quite a scarce resource. Are we ever going to have a dedicated person, John, to be our Snowflake person? Probably not. In fact, I don't know if a data product is big enough, needs to be big enough, should be big enough to actually consume his entire skills, 40 hours a week. So I think there's certain times where it does not make sense to carve up a brand new organization. In fact, that is quite painful to do. The
Yeah.
starting point, until you have a track record of success, is to use what you have, but figure out how you can actually prioritize the workload. And that has been actually the model across the board. And like I said, if we get from 5 data products to 50 to 500, maybe that will change. Maybe we'll have a very dedicated organization. None of the teams that I've worked with in organizations are at that point, But if we're fortunate and data mesh continues on its current trajectory, maybe that will be the end outcome.
So you're talking a lot about change management, the people change in an organization. And I know there's a lot of you out there that know that topic very well, probably better than myself, definitely, and maybe even more than Eric. And so there's a lot of way to affect change in an organization to build teams. But teach me, what does the book cover as it relates to thinking about the teams? Like, I've read the chapter, I've reviewed the chapter. Just remind me, what do you have to say about teams and sort of finding out how to organize those teams? And I don't know if this is where you use your data supply chain analogy, but teach us a little bit about what's in the book as it relates to.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the core data product team. Um, Obviously, that's the core quantum within data mesh. Let's talk about that specifically. So obviously, if you read Zemak's book, our book, the most important role within a data product team is the owner. They're the folks that set the policy, set the stage for the data product. They're accountable for its performance. So what other roles though are there typically in a data product team? Well, there's and by the way, when I say each of these roles, that does not mean a full-time person. In fact, for small, lightweight, agile data products, this may be one or two, maybe three people. So when I talk about these roles, I don't want people to get the impression that there's a lot of people that you need to actually do this. And in fact, I think what I would characterize is some of these roles almost guaranteed are being done by one individual or two individuals. That is a caveat. What we found is there's probably three or four, I would argue, core roles, and I'll go through them kind of in order in the book. The very first one is well, obviously data and security engineering. Data product is about data. Somebody has to know how to manage that data, and they have to know how to secure that data. So data management capability, DBA type role, perhaps data management engineering type role. That's core. The second one is now that I have data, somebody has to actually understand the metadata and do the engineering and apply the security policies against some of that data. So that's in the metadata and the data policies. So that's a role that typically is not full time, but is definitely a role that's carved out within a data product team. Now, the big roles where there's a fair amount of people, depending on the scope and size of your data product, but ingestion engineering, so getting data into the actual data product. So that's where you have skills, whether it's DBT or tools like that, ETL type, older style ETL tools. But data has to come into the data product, and like I said, depending on the scope and size of that data product, that could be quite substantial. So that is typically where the bulk. This in the next team, which I'll talk about, or next role rather, that's where the bulk of the data product team actually resides in the ingestion engineering. The second one, closely related to that, ingestion's taking data in, consumption's taking data out. So the consumption engineering could be, again, DBT, could be ETL. We also see, especially as you start to move towards a little bit more online or real time, what we find is even in the analytics world, we're finding APIs as a vehicle for consumption, change data capture for emitting data, event streaming to do near real-time communication of events. So that consumption engineering is a huge piece of the puzzle. The last one that we thought is important enough to mention is this release management role. So the release management role, and again, sometimes this is baked into the data product owner or part of the core engineering, but
Right.
somebody needs to recognize the fact that the data product changes. The schemas may change. The consumption, the data that gets emitted may change in structure. The data that comes in may change in structure. All that needs to be, first off, captured, managed, and communicated. Of course, if it's not communicated properly, then downstream systems or upstream systems will fail, or the data product may not be able to process as data. So communication of changes in the actual data product, whether it's the internal schema, the ingestion schemas, the consumption schemas, those need to be communicated. Those arguably also, depending on how broadly your data product is used, probably need to be versioned and scheduled and timed. So the whole idea around release management is core to what a data product actually is. Is that a full-time role? Probably not. Is it baked into your core data engineering? Likely. So that's the general team topology that we found. And this may be a little bit different than your traditional organization. Most of these, what we see in most organizations, is these are discrete roles in different organizations. What data mesh and data products in particular do is they bring them into one organization, one team rather, one set of priorities, one set of accountabilities, and one way of actually delivering the capability and communicating changes as a result of that. So that's John, the core team structure that we see is fundamental to delivering data mesh and data products.
Well, I'm glad you went through that. I think each one of those were really important, and other people might use different labels for the kind of work that you were describing. Maybe a data engineer does ingestion and not just management. Like, so your mileage will vary, depending on how you use that terminology in your organization. Uh, but I think it's very important the way you described all of the capabilities that those roles need to be able to have. So I think that's really comprehensive and well thought through. I see we've got about 10 minutes left and haven't seen any questions in the last few. So please, if you're interested about anything, ask me anything about data mesh. And we've got our expert here, Eric, that can help us answer those questions, including anything he might have covered lightly, like data contracts, data products, and stuff. And and I think this is where a lot of us technologists, when we're wearing our technology engineer hat, we think, well, geez, how am I going to coordinate all of these things? And it really becomes the technical side of data mesh can become complicated and ornery. And you might be tempted to kind of build a platform to do everything. And so I just I just wonder, in your experience, have you seen people, and I don't want you to make a product recommendation, but have you seen, you know, what are the sort of the examples that you've seen of people trying to manage data contracts and data products? Like, say a little bit about that. And this is the softball question, but tell us a little bit more about how all of these technical artifacts and bits and bobs are being managed in your experience, because I think we do want to think about the teams and the technologies they use as we think about the total organization. So does
Yeah,
that make
sure. Yeah, let me kind of. There's two topics I wanted to come back to in the time we have, but there's a variety of different capabilities, I'll call, that need to be built out, and if you want to actually reap the benefits of data mesh. So obviously we've talked a lot about data products and data contracts that are in there, and we surface them through discovery or observability type endpoints. So data products are core. The piece that I think typically is overlooked is some people call it a data catalog. We like to call it a data marketplace. And here's the key difference is the data catalog. Typically, the paradigm that we've seen is that metadata from all over the various different data constituencies within the organization, they push the data into a central repository. Recognize some of the products are changing as we speak, in fact. But in general, what we see is organizations push data into a central repository. The challenge with that is, first off, the book of record for the metadata is actually in the databases, or in our terminology, the data product. So the real question is, how do you actually stay true to that book of record? Well, the typical catalogs try and ensure that that synchronization process actually works. It can work, and it does work for many organizations. But many organizations also have challenges with that. And they also know that the moment you have challenges with syncing that stuff, or it being out of date, is it casts aspersions upon your data management capability. That's a big deal. That's not to say you can't make it work. You can. It just takes effort, a lot of extra effort and diligence. What we found with data products, if I think about that slash discovery endpoint, what that really means is every data product can communicate its metadata, among other things. It's metadata, and it can communicate it whenever anybody wants. So what we found is the concept of the marketplace, and the reason we call it different, although it looks very much like a marketplace as opposed to your core typical data catalog, the audience is a little bit different. But the underlying structure of the marketplace is such that the marketplace queries the book of record and does not keep any metadata in and of itself. So what that means is the marketplace can die, it can restart, and it can go and get the data that's needed. The data products publish that information back to the marketplace. So what you end up having is a slightly different approach. It is very resilient. If it falls over within 5 minutes, everything gets synced up again, because the data products continuously update themselves or maintain the status. But what ends up happening now is you don't have to worry about that synchronization aspect. You don't have to worry about the data being stale. Rather, what you can do is you can find the data where you need it in the data product. So the marketplace is that window into data mesh with a very different architecture, taking advantage of the fact that a data product knows its metadata, and it can actually advertise its metadata, unlike regular data, I suppose. So that's one of the aspects that I think was crucial. Now, the second piece I want to talk to, actually, I see a question in the audience. So John, I'll let you take that. And then maybe if there's time, I got one more point that I wanted to highlight, but I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, no. Anuj, thanks for the question. Very observant question. So, can you also please cover other constituents of the data product operating model, in addition to the ones we've covered? We've talked about the platform team, we've talked about the governance team, the enabling team. What else should we be thinking about? Other constituents in the
Yeah, I think maybe it's implied I'll start with the data product team. It may be implied, and yes, there's a data product owner, and they're within the boundaries, but the business sponsor is a crucial constituency. The business sponsor organization, I should say. The reason being is they define what good looks like. They define the value proposition. They provide, in the old world, I call it the requirements, I suppose, but they provide the frame of reference for your data product. So the data product sponsoring organization is foundational. Now, if you read the team topologies book, what you find is the broad general categories cover almost everybody within an organization. But I'll be a little bit more specific. For a data product platform team, you need to be able to figure out where your data exists and who are the experts, the snowflake experts like John here, who actually understand that data and actually can make it available. There's a network team. There's a security team. Crucial.
oh,
Security team, privacy team related to governance. So where I'm going with it in the time that we have, every one of the platform teams can be decomposed into a bunch. The governance team can be decomposed into policy, privacy, et cetera. An enabling team, there's training teams also that support. I would suggest you reach out to and take a look at the team topologies book, and that would mirror a lot of the recommendations that I would have in the time that we have here.
yeah, and Anuj, if we didn't cover what you were looking for, hey, feel free to ping Eric or I after this. But yeah, I think it's really good. And I just want to bold and underline what you said. The business sponsor, right? If there is not a business opportunity that you're chasing with a product, you tend to lack the organizational will to do any of this stuff. And and so what I love about your story with the insurance company is you really went after a huge market opportunity And that drove this opportunity, in my recollection of your description, and really changing the organization was that compelling business case that had been set up. So, Eric, I've done it again. We're out of time. We got 2 minutes left. Oh, this is a good one. Martin's asking, what is the biggest number of data products you've seen in a business? Eric, do you want to give that
I'll give
example?
you yeah. So my experience is these data products, at least in the industries I've been at, are rather coarse. Not super coarse, but coarse enough. I've seen organizations that get up to about 50, 60 and expanding. JGP, though, in the previous one, has worked with organizations that have upwards of 800 data products. They're clearly finer granularity. So the absolute number isn't necessarily comparable because the size and scope of them are different. But there's been some organizations that have taken it to heart and are really progressing rapidly down the data mesh roadmap.
Yeah. Okay, well, I just want to thank you, Eric, and the Data Master Learning community for participating, listening to us pontificate about such matters. If you have questions for anything we've discussed or for the next session, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. And I want to I think that's it. I think,
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, John, there's a lot more in the book. Feel free to buy
oh,
it.
yeah, right.
But I want to say thank you, John, for hosting this. Been a wonderful experience, and thank you to the Data Mesh Learning community, in particular, Paul, for helping
Yeah.
us out.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining today, and make sure to come back tomorrow or next week, not tomorrow, next week, a week from now, on November 6th. We'll be talking about radically transforming data governance with data mesh. So, yeah, hope to see you all there.
It's
Thanks,
going to be
folks.
good.
All right,
Thanks, guys.
thanks a lot.